Why can't kids under 12 get the vaccine?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons for that. Like one is because the way that children's immune systems work is it doesn't mount the same response, right? You have to conduct a trial to show that it's very common that a lesser dose will elicit a strong immune response. So we get a few hundred micrograms of mRNA. It may be something like a child might need 50 or 100 micrograms, because one, you don't want to overdose them unnecessarily, and the second is if you can get the same amount of immune protection from a lower dose, you would go that route for children. They're not small adults, right? That's the reality of it. They don't have an adult immune system. Okay. They have a pediatric immune system. So you have to treat it like a different clinical study. So that's what's happening right now. They're doing a whole clinical trial to identify what the optimum dose is to get the highest amount of protection. And it will very likely be lower than what adults get.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the Danger Room. I'm Dilemma, your host. Today's guest is a very special friend of mine. I've known him for years. Very smart, very intelligent. We always knew that this guy was most likely going to save the freaking world. And today we're going to bring him in, talk to today about COVID and a few other things that pop in our brain. Dr. Tariq Warsi. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
And, just living, trying to live better. Not sure. Almost died from COVID. That was fun.
Well, we're glad you didn't.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't either. That was a thing. Discover some stuff about myself. I made a podcast about that. It was basically the thing that saved me was Daredevil.
Daredevil, how so?
Like, there was a moment where I gave up. Like, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna give up for like about 5 seconds. For 5 seconds, I gave up. And it was at the middle of the night. I was going to the bathroom, and I was like, this is struggling. And all of a sudden, Daredevil pops in my brain, and I'm like, what would Matt Murdock do? He's only human, in the comic books. I know he's a comic book character, but he's only human. His powers are heightened senses, right? He doesn't have superpowers per se. And I was like, if Matt Murdock gives up, or he calls Frank Castle or Luke Cage and says, hey man, can you handle my lightweight with the Kingpin, because I got beat up a little bit, I can't make it. Then I started thinking, like, if he does that from here on out, every time he goes out and puts his uniform on, he's just beating up people for the sake of beating up people. And I was just like, I can't do that. I gotta try. I have to try. I have to go out and find the Kingpin myself. And then I made it back to my bed, and then my doctor said pretty much the same thing that same morning. He was like, hey man, like you're getting better. I see you walking around every once in a while, but you gotta use this breath thing. I forgot what it's called.
The spirometer.
Yes, thank you. That's that thing. You have to like really blow into that thing really hard. You have to like just get. I was like, all right, and I did that because that stuff sucked. So pretty much, Daredevil was and he killed whatever personality that was, that weakness that gave up. So, yeah.
Moments of epiphany, right?
Oh my God.
To Daredevil.
So the most nerdiest thing, me being a nerd, and that happened. So that made perfect sense.
Well, those are important moments, right? It's hard not to overestimate like the sheer will it takes to get to that point. So we're happy you did, because it would have been scary otherwise.
Oh my God, yeah, because other people in our circle of friends, they've contracted COVID, but they never was admitted. I was like, me? I'm the one that gets admitted. Oh man, no. I don't want to go.
You never know.
You never know. Rolling the dice. And I did everything that you were supposed to do. I wore the mask. I wiped down everything. I had a little routine going when I come on. I wipe myself down, wipe my shoes down, everything. I avoided people. I only went out to get food. It was like, and then like I mentioned before, I was gonna get the vaccine, and only until they FDA approved it, and then the moment they did, that's when I get sick. I'm like, word. just wait a day later. All right.
Yeah,
cool.
that's a tricky part of it, right? Viruses don't care.
They don't care one iota. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, Park, state your credentials for the people who do not know you, for the people out here as we press forward.
Yeah. Happy to. So I have a bachelor's of science degree in biological sciences and a PhD in cell molecular and developmental biology. Earned those at UC Riverside, so in Southern California, very close to where you are. So rep to UCR. And then, after graduate school, I did my postdoc at Harvard Med for a couple of years, and it's been in and out of different parts of the industry and academics for the last 15 years. So have a good broad understanding of the biological sciences, and have to answer any questions you have for me today.
Well, sir, I'm not esteemed as you are, but in the time that I created some valid questions, mostly for the common man.
Yeah.
Because the common man needs to, I believe, understand better, if you will.
Sure.
So the first question is, for those who are living under a rock, what is the coronavirus exactly, and how is it spread?
Yeah, so coronavirus itself is, you guys have heard of SARS, right? And SARS came out, a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago. This is very related to that. It originates from a, common coronavirus. Coronaviruses are very common. Many of them cause, very simple things. That's a common cold. But this specific coronavirus is, they call it SARS-CoV-2. And it's associated with a respiratory disease, as you're well aware of. And it's very contagious, right? So it's a coronavirus that has the ability to replicate, very fast. It incorporates into your nasal passages, into your lungs, and it elicits like a really strong immune response. And that immune response is what drives much of the disease and severe disease that you see right now, right? It's very dynamic. It's very interesting to see kind of how people respond to it. Some people don't have symptoms at all. Some have very mild symptoms. Some have moderate symptoms. Some, end up in the ICU, and other people die, right? We're looking now, 700,000 people in this country have died, multi-million across the world, right? So it's very impactful. Some people think it's just like the common flu, but it's very different than the common flu. It's much more contagious. Has a very high replication rate, and can accumulate at very high numbers in the body. So not only is it highly contagious, and it's as you and many of your listeners probably know, it's transmissible through the air, right? Close contact. It is transmitted via respiratory droplets. And it gets into your nasal passages, into your mouth, into your esophagus, trachea, into your airways. And finds its home in your lungs, right? And one of the real big complications of this virus is, people that mount a strong immune response, people that are fighting it off very effectively, are often the ones that suffer the most, severely. And that's
Really?
more so because if you think about it this way, right? If you take in a big breath of virus, you get a large, what's called inoculation. So you inoculate your lungs with a very high concentration of virus. Then your body needs to fight that off. So what your body does is it mounts an immune response, right? That immune response, accumulates fluids and accumulates white blood cells and other immune factors to your lungs, and it gunks up the works, right? It causes a lot of fluid to build up, as like pneumonia.
Yes.
And because of that fluid buildup and the inflammatory response in your lungs, your alveoli, the parts of your lungs that are able to transfer gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, can't do that, right? Imagine trying to like pop a balloon underwater, right? It's not going to really happen, right? The air isn't going to come out. Which if you popped a balloon in the air, it would just deflate and the gases would spread around. If you pop a balloon underwater, it would take more time for the air to disperse. So the same things are happening in your lungs. It's because your body's fighting off the infection. It accumulates all of this liquid around your air sacs, and you're not effectively transferring gases. So you can't exhale carbon dioxide fast enough, and you can't transfer oxygen fast enough. Okay. So these people, suffer from what they call ARDS, ARDS. It's acute respiratory distress syndrome. And that's what manifests into really severe COVID disease.
That was awesome, and it makes a lot of sense to what I understood because I lived it. I'm like, so because it makes a lot of sense for me because I did a lot of, how you say, breathing techniques before the COVID. So I was always into the doing that. So when you mentioned breathing in more and gathering to your lungs, your immune system is now pretty much the way I understood it, what you just said. The more I breathe in, the more my immune system was trying to fight it.
Well, it's not just that, right? So you have a large level of inoculation. So depending on your exposure, right? You can. So for example, if you're exposed to the virus for a prolonged amount of time, say 2 hours, maybe talking to somebody or interacting with somebody that has COVID already, your initial exposure is going to be greater than just passing by somebody on the sidewalk, right? So you've already inoculated more of your body than you would have just been passing by somebody. So it's the duration of the infection, the initial infection, and then also the severity of that person. So if they're very highly contagious, maybe they are asymptomatic and they just have a lot of it in their system, they pass it to you, maybe you don't even know they're sick, and you talk to them for an hour, right, in person, and all that time they're inoculating you, right? So because of that, you have a higher exposure now to that specific level of virus, and that virus then goes on to replicate. Now, Delta itself, I mean, we've seen this more recently, has a higher replicatory rate and can inoculate at a higher concentration. So now, because of this new variant, right, we're seeing a lot more severe disease or contagious people, and it causes the counts of viruses in your nose and in your passages to be higher, has a higher propensity for transmission. But then once it's in you, it's also going to replicate, right? So it's not just that initial inoculation, right? It's getting into you, it's getting into your cells, and it's also starting to replicate. And then once those cells, have replicated, they burst and spread more of the virus to the surrounding area. So it's just like your normal, viral effect, which is, viruses get into your cells, they replicate, they rupture, and they spread. And that's their one and only job, right? And they're really good at it. So it just makes it that much harder to try and overcome.
Now, from the word itself, the Delta variant, is the Delta variant a mutation, or as the word implies, or is it similar to like a different form of species of a spider? Because I don't understand.
Yeah, so the variant in this case is just a mutation, and it's a mutation in one single amino acid. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's a single or just maybe a couple of amino acids in the protein of the spike protein. So the spike is that the one of those little protrusions on the outside. You always see the coronavirus, and then it has all these little things sticking off of it. The thing sticking off of it is the S protein. So that protein is what binds to a receptor on our cells. And that's how it makes its way into our cells. It uses that receptor to bind a receptor on our cells, and then it gets engulfed into our cells and replicates that way. But the way that the antibodies work right now. So, for example, if you're inoculated with the vaccine, you're creating antibodies against that S protein. Those antibodies bind to a specific site on that protein itself. But if the protein on the coronavirus has been able to mutate slightly, imagine, just having a little bit of protrusion on that spike protein makes the antibody harder for it to grab onto, right? So now the antibody that's supposed to protect you can't fit onto that S protein as effectively as it could before. And it's theoretically not going to work as well. But I would say that, one of the things that maybe I should take a step back and say that the mutation in the S protein isn't stopping the antibodies from binding, because the vaccines still work incredibly well against Delta variant. It's just allowing more transmissibility. So maybe it's able to bind to the cells better in our body. So the mutation that arose from this particular mutation enables it to maybe bind to our cells more effectively, and dissociate less frequently. So it can grab on better, it can incorporate better, and it can transmit better. So one thing that I don't want to say is that the vaccines are not working against the Delta variant, because they are. It doesn't change the efficacy of the vaccine. Maybe the mutation is making it more amenable for it to get into our cells.
Well, that segues into my next question.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, not the vaccines in this case, but are there any other vaccines other than the COVID vaccines that we should have taken or can take that would give us any kind of added protection against contracting COVID? Are there any out there at the moment? Or how does it work? How does that work?
Yeah, so your traditional vaccines are going to be very specific for that disease. So when you get inoculated, before you go to school, you'll fill out your little yellow card, and you'll be vaccinated against mumps, measles, rubella, pertussis, yellow fever, dengue, all of these things, measles, all of these things that had once upon a time been very, very incredibly dangerous diseases, have all but been eradicated because of vaccines, right? Those vaccines are not going to protect you from COVID. The annual flu vaccine is not going to protect you from COVID. Shingles and measles vaccines aren't going to protect you from COVID, right? It's very specific for a very specific disease. So really the only way to have protection from COVID is by getting the COVID vaccine, one of the three that are available right now.
So the person who eats well and has a healthy lifestyle, do they have any kind of added protection against contracting the virus, or does it all boil down to the immune system?
Well, I mean, if you think about it this way, right? I mean, the healthiest people still get common cold, right? Mm-hmm. You can try and prevent that by having a strong immune system. And a strong immune system is going to come from diet. It's going to come from exercise. It's going to come from limited exposure. It's going to come from a number of different ways. Your diet is what ultimately, your diet and overall health is what ultimately decides on how strong your immune system is, right? So if you're getting the right nutrients, if you're getting the right amount of sleep, if you're exercising, if you're doing 100,000 different things to make sure that you're healthy, yeah, you're probably going to have a pretty good immune system, and you're going to be able to fight off very common colds. And for a lot of people, they're able to fight off coronavirus, right? I mean, there are many people that have gotten infected and never had a symptom, right? And those people are usually the ones that are able to mount a pretty good response and fight it off just like any other virus that infects you. To say that, if there are any kind of homeopathic or off-the-shelf kind of solutions for this, I don't want to say that that's true, because I don't want to give false hope to people in the sense that they can eat broccoli and be protected, right? That's just not the case, right? But I will say that there are plenty of people out there that are perfectly healthy that end up in the ICU, right? People that are in their teens, early 20s, exercise every day, are running marathons, and they end up in the ICU. And it's just because I mean, I don't want to say just because, it's probably because of a number of reasons. One, maybe they're mounting a really, strong immune response. Maybe they weren't able to, overcome the inflammation that was initially caused by the infection. Could be a number of different things, but this virus is, it's not taking, any breaks, right? It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how healthy you are. If it finds a vulnerability in that person, it will exploit.
What does the COVID vaccine do exactly? How does it work?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just focus on the two most popular ones, which are the Pfizer and the Moderna one. So these are what we call mRNA vaccines. And how it works is mRNAs are very similar to DNA. So people may know what DNA is, right? What makes up your genetic code, makes you who you are. RNAs are essentially kind of another way of writing DNA, right? It's a ribonucleic acid. It's a nucleic acid in the sense that it's very similar to DNA, but it doesn't serve the same purpose. For mRNA vaccines, how they are administered, I mean, it's administered in what's called a lipid nanoparticle. So it's a droplet that encompasses the RNA itself. RNAs are synthesized, meaning they're chemically synthesized by the manufacturer, by the drug company. And how it works is it's administered to the person. It finds its way into a cell, and much like a normal virus, it gets processed. So you can imagine it traveling the same path as a virus would in your body. So normally a virus, you get infected, it gets into your cells. Some of these cells are able to process it, and they chop it all up, and they take those viral particles and they present them onto the outside of the cells. And those presentations of those foreign particles create an immune response, and that immune response is able to fight off that infection of future virus infections. The same thing happens when you administer an mRNA vaccine. It's not a virus, so it's not going to infect you. It's not going to replicate. It's not going to integrate into your genome. It's not going to cause any unknown side effects other than the temporary things like fever, nausea, chills. When you get like a flu.
Yeah,
but the way that it works is, first or second?
First.
Okay, the second one's worse. So be prepared. But the way that it works is the mRNA will get into cells. It'll get processed. It will get presented, and it will mount an immune response, similar to what the way a normal virus would. But in this case, you're only presenting one protein of that virus, and this is the S protein. So the same protein that we were talking about previously. But what happens is the protein will get presented. Your immune system will essentially recognize that as foreign and mount a response against that specific protein. So the next time it encounters a protein, either viral or by the virus. So if you were to get actually infected by the virus after you were vaccinated, it would recognize that S protein as foreign, and it would attack the virus. Right? Those antibodies would essentially fight off that infection. So it's an active way of generating immunity without having to contract the virus.
Awesome. This is, we mentioned it before slightly, this is all synthetic biology techniques, correct? I read an article of her name was Sarah Ives, and she was doing synthetic biology for antibodies. So is this the same realm? Did they use that? Are you aware of that? Her studies?
Yeah, so synthetic biology is just a part of the industry that uses you're essentially engineering biology intentionally, right? So you're engineering cells, you're engineering proteins, you're engineering viruses in this case. In this case, you're engineering an mRNA, which looks like a viral protein, and you synthesize it from scratch. So you're synthesizing it from its basic components, right? You don't have to purify it away from an actual virus. You just create it, I don't want to get too nitty gritty here, but nucleotide by nucleotide, like one by one base. And in that case, it's just a small stretch of the protein that will ultimately get transcribed and translated into something that looks like the S protein. So again, it's not a viral infection. It's something it's a nucleic acid that was synthesized, put into a droplet, and administered to the person. So yes, it is synthetic biology. Maybe not in the same way, synthetic biology has gotten some bad, a bit of a bad rap, like, GMOs and things like that. But this is using similar technology.
I believe if we're talking about the gene, I read your did you call it like an article or your post on grapes and how it tastes like vanilla? I was like, what?
That was a long time ago.
I was like, really? Vanilla? And then that was very interesting to me. I read it once, but it caught my attention. Like, so they synthesized the flavor of grapes, but it was using vanilla?
No, I think this was a long time ago, and I'm probably going to get my own. I'm going to get mixed up here, but what I said back then is, I had purchased some grapes that taste like cotton candy. Right, there are these cotton candy grapes in the grocery store, and I was thinking to myself, man, how did they get these things that taste like cotton candy? Right. So my background is synthetic biology, and some of that is being applied to the industry right now. Like there are companies out there that are making artificial flavors using synthetic biology. So they're brewing yeast or bacteria to make these flavors that you see very common in your everyday food. So instead of trying to make artificial vanilla from via a synthetic process, they're brewing it in yeast like you would brew kombucha or beer or alcohol, something like that. And they purify those flavors away. So that's one side of synthetic biology. There's the other side of synthetic biology, which is kind of on the therapeutic side, which is kind of what we're talking about today.
But what I loved, what I took away from that was the ending towards the read was how people give it a bad rep, the synthetic and all that, and like they're not really thinking about the future of food. It's like it's going to be billions upon billions of people on the planet, and you need to start thinking about feeding those people. Like now as it stands, no one can predict that the food shortages, like we're not really suffering right now. And like you mentioned that you've been across the world and you've seen true starvation. Like he's right. We're not really starving. I worked at a couple of places where we threw away food, and I asked that question, like, why are we throwing away food? He's like, oh, because X, Y, and Z. Why don't you just give it to the homeless? It costs money. Okay. All right.
That could be that could be for a whole different conversation one of these days. We'll have to do that too.
Yeah. So, which COVID vaccine do you recommend?
I would recommend anyone that you get your hands on.
Even the Johnson & Johnson, which Dave Chappelle made a joke about.
Yeah, I haven't seen the recent Chappelle Netflix special, so I don't know yet. But I would say that if you want a one and done shot, get the J&J. If you want the Pfizer or the Moderna one, get that one. I would just recommend whatever is available to you. You get it. And the hard part about this is people are still hesitating, right? Yes. And there's a lot of hesitation out there. I try to wrap my head around that, but this is a public health crisis, right? And more so than anything, if it's your belief that you're waiting for full approval, right? We've gotten there. If you're waiting for more people, people often say that they don't want to be part of a science experiment. Well, 3 billion people have now gotten inoculated, something like that. So if you're waiting for more data to come in, you're probably not going to see anything different, right? The data is out. Like, people are being protected by this. If you're waiting for long-term effects of genomic integration, that's never going to happen, right? There's never going to be any genetic effects from these vaccines, and hesitancy is real. But really, the only way we're going to get out of this pandemic is if people get vaccinated.
I believe that wholeheartedly, especially since I've lived it. I had friends that actually passed from it, and a whole bunch of other slaps in the face, if you will. So, on that note, any closing thoughts on this particular pandemic and science as a whole before we head out?
Well, I think maybe one thing that I'll say is there's a lot of everything we do these days is politicized, right? There seems to be a lot of camps that people really feed into, and one thing that I will say is science is not politics, right? And facts are facts. So you go to your doctor when you have a broken bone, you go to your doctor when you have cancer, you go to your doctor when you need a heart transplant, right? If you can trust them for those kinds of recommendations, why won't you trust them for this? And there's nothing out there that should prevent you from doing your own research. I think people are always saying that they're doing their own research, but I would say that if you trust the experts and you trust the people that have devoted their lives to saving others, then you should trust them when they recommend getting vaccinated.
I trust you.
Yeah.
I got the Mrna. Only because I chose that one mainly because when I looked into what they had in them, they had one thing. Mrna had one thing that Pfizer did not, and I for my actual health that I know of, like, oh, I actually need that in my system. Actually, I need that. That's how I chose it.
Yeah, the Pfizer and the Moderna are almost exactly the same, right? They're very, very similar. Yeah,
they're very fair, but said one just had one thing that one didn't have. Like, I want that one. But all right, everybody. Thank you for coming, Mr. Dr. Tariq Warsi. It's been a pleasure. We're gonna do this again. If you can stop by on your very, very busy schedule of saving the fucking world. And we'll do this next time.
Yeah, man.
Anything you want to say?
Happy to be here. No, I'm just glad that I was able to be here, speak to your audience, and yeah, we'll do this again.
All right. Peace, guys.